And the media close to the Sisi regime, it looks like they are happy that the central bank keep the dollar under 30 pounds. Do you think this is the goal of Egyptian government?
Well, they're frightened of one of the symbolic impact of the dramatic decline in the value of the pound. This has always been Egypt's leaders since Nasser have taken the relative exchange rates between the pound and foreign currencies, most importantly the dollar, as a measure of the performance of their regimes. And so they have all been very reticent to allow the pound to freely float against foreign currencies. The other factor is the associated impact on the economy of a devaluing pound, most important of which is inflation. And since inflation is now back up to the level it was in 2016 in the wake of the first IMF loan, they're being hit on both sides, both the reputational side and the inflation side. And so what I think they're going to do is gradually re-implement a so-called managed float of the pound, and they have been given a bit of wiggle room to do that in the agreement with the IMF. So the central bank will be buying with at least some of its share of foreign currencies that it holds. We'll be buying back pounds to prevent the collapse being as dramatic as it was when it fell to 32. But this is a short-term measure. The real problem is the absence of inflows of foreign currency because of the weak economy. And that is going to take time to address, if indeed it ever is. And so it's a very tight management problem, and it involves, no doubt, the president himself, the head of the central bank, some of the ministers, and the reactions in the street, which they have to take account of.
Yeah, and the IMF agreement with the Egyptian government stated that Egypt must devaluate its currency, cut subsidies, increase energy prices, offer more space to the private sector, and withdraw the military grab on the economy and sell state assets. But do you think this agreement is the right recipe to save the collapsing economy in Egypt?
Well, all of these steps ultimately are necessary. Whether they can be implemented simultaneously without dramatic negative consequences remains to be seen. And in any case, there are other measures that are important as well, which are not in the IMF agreement. And chief among them is that the development model that the current government is following, and which previous governments followed in greater or lesser measure, has not worked. And that's clear from the crises that we're about at the present time. Egypt, and meaning in every case its president, has failed to articulate a coherent economic development strategy that not only the country could get behind, but the region and the world. And so there is yet to be, out of all of these agreements, and the publication, for example, of the state ownership policy just at the very end of 2022, none of these really articulate what the strategy is going to be. So the actual strategy, judging by expenditures, is the government of the present government is to invest heavily in physical infrastructure based on the assumption that if you build roads and overpasses and new cities and so on, all of this will then stimulate economic activity, which it does do, but basically only in the construction phase of that. And so the GDP of Egypt has consistently the last 2-3 years been about 5%, which is quite good by global standards. But in reality, it's simply a reflection of the infusion of a large amount of public capital into construction projects. Now, the question is, are these construction projects going to then overcome the economic deficiencies that are there? And there is no established linkage, either in Egypt or elsewhere, where this strategy has been followed, that if you build it, they will come. You can build it, and it never pays itself off. And that's likely going to be the case with much of the infrastructure that has been built in the last 3 years. So absent an economic model that integrates the different factors of production and gives relative weightings to agriculture, manufacturing, service, and then the subsectors of those parts of the economy, you don't know what you're doing. And so it's a project by project management of the economy, not a program managed economy. And so this has not been addressed in the IMF agreement. It's not addressed in the state ownership policy. And indeed, it's not even discussed because it's not allowed to be discussed by the government. So absent a coherent economic policy that gives clear indications of what needs to be done, when and how, then the economy will continue to wallow as it is at present.